Good afternoon. This is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law. If you all can just put in the chat box that you can hear me clearly, that would be great, just so that I know that the audio is working well. I hope you all are having a great afternoon. I'm glad that you joined us. As I said, my name is Emily Sumner. I'm with Sumner Immigration Law, an immigration attorney there. We have with us also today Samantha Davis. She is my colleague at Sumner Immigration Law, another immigration lawyer with us, and she will be with us too. So without further ado, we will go ahead and get started. As we go through this, we've designed the presentation to try to answer the questions that you all submitted through the registration process. If your question is not answered, it probably means that it was really detailed, in fact, specific, and it's not something that we can appropriately discuss through a webinar like this. But we're happy to set a time for a consultation, or if you're a current client, you can email us your question and we're happy to help. So this is what we're going to try to cover today, or what we're going to cover. Some of the hot topics that have come up, and they'll also discuss or answer rather the questions that you have submitted. First is international students and online learning. There's been some big changes with that. It's caused a lot of stress, but has subdued somewhat as of now. Public charge injunction, again, lots of changes recently, but that's subdued a little bit for now. USCIS filing fees are changing as of October 2nd. What's going on with USCIS? Is the case processing being delayed? What are the approximate timelines? What's going on with the prospective furlough, and what are the impacts? An update on the H1B Cap situation. Voting, if you haven't heard, there's a presidential election on November 2nd this year, and we're very excited about that and want as many people to participate in that process, the voting process, as you can. So we're going to be talking about that and providing additional information. And as I said, if you have questions, additional questions as we go along, feel free to put those in the chat box and we'll address them as time permits. So right now I'm going to turn this over to Samantha, who's going to talk about international students.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. So typically if you're an international student, so an F1 visa student or an M visa student, you're limited on what types of classes you can take. So the regulations prohibit you from taking more than one online class per semester. But due to health and safety regulations, ICE adjusted their guidance and had been allowing international students to take a full online course and still meet the regulatory requirements for maintaining your full courses. After that guidance had ended over the summer, they had issued some new guidance that said that was ending and they would be prohibiting students from participating in an entirely online course of study in the fall. Well, luckily there was a lot of pushback in just the general community and particularly from universities. Harvard, MIT, and some other big name universities filed a case with the courts, and luckily that forced ICE to change their minds. And so now they have issued new guidance. So it's a little bit different for continuing students and for initial students. So we'll talk about them separately. For continuing students, if you were an active F or M student on March 9th, that's the important date to remember, you will be allowed to temporarily continue your online classes and you'll be counting those towards your full course of study. So you won't have any issues if your university is doing all online classes due to COVID to abide by health and safety regulations. You'll be able to continue. You'll be issued a new I-20 and the DSO should contact you about that. The problem is if you were not currently studying in the United States on March 9th, so if you were intending to come in for this upcoming fall semester, you will not be allowed to enter the United States if your university is doing a full online course of study. If they're doing a hybrid course, so some of your courses are going to be online and some will be in person, you will be allowed to enter, but it's really important to, if you're a new student and you'll be coming in for the fall, to make sure that you know whether your current courses are going to be all online, or if they're going to be having some sort of in-person aspect to it. I know universities are changing things pretty quickly as we're seeing things changing with COVID. So that's really important that you stay up to date with your university and your DSO on how your particular courses are going to be for the fall.
Thank you, Sam. The next topic that we wanted to cover is the public charge injunction. This is a complex topic, and I won't go into it in detail, but kind of the short summary is that public charge, the idea of public charge has been around for decades and decades. The idea is that a foreign national has to show that they're going to be able to support themselves financially and will not just rely on public benefits once they come into the United States. For decades, the way to address that, and it hasn't always, the way to address that for most cases, family-based cases at least, and other cases, has been submitting the affidavit of support, the I-864. The Trump administration has decided that that's not sufficient, and they are now requiring, or they were requiring, they would like to require Form I-944, which is an 18-page long form that asks for detailed information about a person's financial history and that of everyone in the household. So that's things like sources of income, a list and documentation of debts and liabilities, documentation of a credit score, proof that you have health insurance, education documentation, other documentation as well. As you can imagine, that has been litigated, that requirement has been litigated. Several entities have sued the federal government and there are ongoing lawsuits. I want to be clear with the public charge rule that the lawsuits are still ongoing. So in October of this past year, it was supposed to be implemented. At the last minute, there was an injunction, temporary injunction. Then in February, the Supreme Court said, nope, the public charge rule, even though it's still being litigated, can still go forward. You all have to use the I-944. So since February, we've had to use this new extensive form for almost all green card filings, family-based and employment-based. On July 29th, the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York enjoined the Department of Homeland Security from enforcing, applying, implementing, or treating as effective. So in other words, bottom line is this particular federal court issued a nationwide temporary injunction, and it is nationwide, that's important to note, it does prevent the administration from implementing the new public charge rule for now. As I said before, it is nationwide. So this applies no matter where you are in the United States or where you live. And it is temporary. The litigation is still ongoing. So it's possible that in the future, the Supreme Court or another court would decide that yes, in fact, this is legitimate and the additional public charge requirements can go forward. So we're pleased right now that we don't have to submit this for most adjustment or for adjustment of status filing cases, but it's possible that that could change in the future. Another huge change that's come about this summer is USCIS filing fee changes. You may have heard that USCIS says that they are running out of money. They can't fund their operations based on the revenue that they have coming in. And it's important to know that USCIS, it's a federal agency, but they are not funded primarily through taxpayer dollars. So there are other federal agencies, for example, Department of Labor, that are funded primarily through tax revenues. That's not true for USCIS. They get their revenue for operations through the filing fees. So they have assessed the filing fees and determined that they need to adjust the filing fees. The changes that are coming up are pretty complex. The final rule is 500 some pages. And of course, a lot of that is comments, responses to comments that the agency received. It's not all the rule, obviously, but the bottom line is that the fees are changing. So in addition to knowing that the fees are changing, overall, there's an increase in filing fees by an average of 20%. That does not mean that every filing fee is going up by 20%. Some are staying the same, some are going down, some are increasing dramatically more, some are being doubled or almost doubled. So it's important to know, and we'll talk about those changes in a minute, but one thing I want to point out and make sure that everyone is really aware of is the form versions are going to change and the filing fee amounts are going to change for almost all applications in one way or another. And that is a primary reason that cases are rejected. I'm not talking about denied. I'm not talking about they're accepted by USCIS and USCIS reviews the case and then decides to deny the case or issue a request for evidence. I'm saying just rejected in the mailroom. So a primary reason for being rejected in the mailroom, and something that we see a lot from people who originally file on their own or try to file on their own, is the fee amounts are wrong and they're using the wrong forms. So that's something to really pay attention to as we proceed into the fall. This will take effect October 2nd of 2020. So if you are in the process of filing a case now, or if you're thinking about filing a case now, this would be a great time to file because A, we don't have the temporary or we don't have the public charge rule that we talked about just a minute ago. And the fees for the most part are lower now than they will be starting in October. The other key points, the I-485 filing fee. So the I-485 is the form that we use to $1,225, and that includes biometrics, and it also includes the travel document and the work permit, which most people want. Most people want and need that work permit and or travel document to be able to travel and work while their green card is pending. So the fee will change. It will be bifurcated now, or I guess trifurcated, if that's a word. It's split up into, depending on what you are applying for. So there'll be the base filing fee. And on the right side of the screen, we have the base filing fees here, but we have the base filing fees, or the new base filing fees. We have the base filing fees, and then for the adjustment of status, if you want a work permit or travel document or travel document, you have to pay for those separately, and that will effectively double the cost, double the filing fees for that particular filing. Another important thing to note that will affect a number of companies is the $4,000, it's called the public charge, or sorry, the public law fee, not public charge, public law fee. But there's a $4,000 fee that's associated, that's required for new H1B and L petitions, only for companies that have at least 50 employees, and at least 50% of those are on H or L status. So it does not affect every employer filing for an H or an L, but it does affect those who are larger companies and who file a larger number of petitions. For those particular groups, for those particular petitioners, they will have to submit this $4,000 fee, not just for new cases, as is the case right now, but also for extensions, basically for any type of filing other than something that's just an amendment. The regulation says if it's just an amendment, the fee is not, the $4,000 fee is not required, but otherwise it is if you meet the requirements for having to pay that public law fee. The time frame for premium processing will change. So premium processing is a program that USCIS offers for some types of filings, but not all. It's not offered for green card filings. But it's offered for a number of filings. Right now, the time frame for that is 15 calendar days. So from the time USCIS receives a premium processing request to the time they issue a decision or issue a request for evidence, right now is 15 calendar days, or else they have to refund the money, the premium processing fee. Now that's changing, or it will change in October, to 15 business days. So that means weekends are not counted, federal holidays are not counted. So that will extend the processing time for premium processing cases. And as I said, several new form versions will be published, including a new form I-129, which is used frequently for employment-based filings. It's possible that we anticipate other forms will change as well. So definitely take a look, be on the lookout for that. What's going on with USCIS? We receive multiple emails every day from clients who are understandably anxious about what is happening with USCIS. So USCIS has been open through the pandemic. They have been able to work from home, but they have closed for in-person interviews for fingerprinting and for in-person interviews that are required. So those particular processes that require biometrics or an interview have been slowed down because they haven't been able to do that. They reopened in July. They're prioritizing N400, which is citizenship cases, and oath ceremonies. And then they're slowly implementing the biometrics appointments and the in-person interviews. We're starting to see those are resuming. Right now, we don't have an estimated time frame of by how much particular cases will be delayed because of the pandemic, but we do know that there is a delay. My guess is around 3 to 4 months because that's around the amount of time that they were closed, but it may take them longer, or they may be able to speed up some things and catch up. We'll keep you posted on how that develops, but for now, know that it's absolutely normal. If you have not received a notice for an interview that you're expecting, we're tracking that for our clients and making sure that things are progressing as we expect to, in line in accordance with what we're seeing from USCIS and with other clients. But if you're waiting for that, I know it's a tough situation to not know what's going on and not know when to expect things, but we're tracking it, we're on top of it, and we'll definitely let you all know as we have further updates. The other potential change with USCIS, big change, is furlough. So USCIS, as I mentioned, has decided that determined that they don't have enough funding, and hopefully the fee increase will help that, the fee increase that I talked about a minute ago, but they say that they were going to furlough about 73% of their workforce as of the beginning of August. They've postponed that until August 31st. They're seeking additional funding from Congress, but of course there are strings that may be attached to that, so they're trying to work that out. So hopefully the furlough will be avoided. If there is a furlough, of course things will be slower. We'll have to take things as it comes if that happens. I am hopeful that that will not happen. A furlough has not, like this, to this extent, has not happened since I've been practicing the past 15 years. So I'm hopeful that it won't happen. This won't be the first time in my practice, at least, that we're seeing this. But again, we'll see what happens. If that happens, we'll keep everyone posted. You can still, even if the furlough happens, you can still file cases. USCIS will still accept filings. They will still operate just on a much slimmer workforce, of course, and things will be slowed down. And again, if that happens, we'll let people know as soon as we have information from USCIS as to what they're prioritizing versus putting on the back burner. Sam is going to talk to us now about the H1B Cap update.
So this year's H1B Cap process was a little bit different. We had a couple new things and a couple unexpected things thrown into the mix. So this year was the first year that we did the online pre-registration process. And then after registering, we did the lottery. So things started out a little bit different. And then about the time that we started getting all of that put together, we ran into this whole pandemic situation that I don't think anyone expected. So right now what we're seeing with H1B Cap cases is we're seeing a pretty big backlog of getting the receipt notices. We're starting to get them in a little bit quicker than we were at the very beginning, but USCIS did start out with a backlog to begin with. So even though we could start filing cases in April, USCIS didn't start issuing receipt notices until early to middle May. So they started out with about a month and a half of a backlog of filed cases to issue receipt notices for anyways. And then we had them working from home and additional delays. So we are seeing a pretty heavy backlog with receipt notices, but they are coming in. We're seeing receipt notices for both regular and premium processing cases. So AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, has issued some advice. They say that if you haven't received your receipt notice within about 6 to 7 weeks, you should contact USCIS and see if you can get some sort of communication from them about issuing that. We're starting to see our receipt notices pick up, so I'm hoping that we won't have any cases that run into that issue. But if you have filed separately and you haven't received your receipt notice and it's been past that 6 or 7 week, you can have either yourself or your attorney contact USCIS. Another thing that I know people are curious about is whether or not another lottery will be run. So as of right now, there hasn't been any changes in the statuses within the registration process, but an additional selection process or lottery is possible. At the end of USCIS's fiscal year, which is September 30th, we'll know for sure how that will happen. But right now we're kind of in that limbo time where we're waiting to see whether or not USCIS will run another lottery. It's definitely possible, maybe this year more than others because of lower filings. Even if people were selected, a lot of positions may have no longer been available at the filing time due to COVID or, you know, company issues. So we might see it this year, but we're holding off until we get confirmation from USCIS, and as soon as we have that, we'll for sure be letting everybody know. So the other important thing that we wanted to talk about is voting. So hopefully everybody knows that this year we have an upcoming presidential election. We're not going to get into the candidates right now or preferences, but the important thing is that everybody votes. So if you're currently able to vote, what we're going to do is we're going to have a series on our social media and possibly have another webinar that goes into the voting process and maybe some candidate information. So it's really important that you guys will have a slide in a little bit about how to follow us on social media. But in order to see all this voting information, it'd be great if you guys could follow us, because we're going to provide some information on how to register to vote in your state, what the deadlines are, how to make sure if you recently got your naturalization citizenship but maybe didn't fill out the voter registration information at the oath ceremony, because I know the oath ceremonies have been a little bit different recently, how to go about doing that, how to make sure you get your ballot if you're not comfortable voting in person. Different states and different localities are handling online or in mail-in ballots versus in-person voting differently. So we're going to go over that. And right now, if you take a look at our blog, we actually have a blog post up that has the link to where you can find the deadline for your state. So every state is going to have a different deadline to register to vote. There aren't any that are super, super soon, but it's really important to make sure that you get that registered as quickly as possible, because we are also facing some delays with USPS. And if you are looking to get a mail-in ballot, that could take some time. So we're definitely having, promoting everyone who can vote to vote. It's a very important presidential election that's coming up. And if you follow us on social media, we'll have a lot more interactive posts on how you can go about that process and making sure that you hit all your deadlines that's necessary and you get out there and vote.
Get out there and vote. Thank you, Sam. One thing that I want to add to that is that if you are not a U.S. citizen, then please do not register to vote. That will significantly harm your immigration prospects in the future, U.S. immigration prospects in the future. So just keep in mind that you do, for federal elections, you do have to be a U.S. citizen in order to vote. And just the process of registering to vote can be very harmful to your prospects. So if you have a question about that, about whether or not you're eligible to register to vote, please let us know, and we're happy to help you with that. Voting, as you all likely know, is kind of at a keystone of democracy in the United States. So your vote counts, every single vote counts, and we want to do whatever we can to get as many people participating in this democratic process as we can. So this is the information on how to follow us. Actually, this next slide is on social media. We're on Facebook and LinkedIn. We have pages there. And as Sam said, we'll be posting a series of information posts about the voting process and the deadlines in the near future. Other ways that you can keep up with us are reading our blog posts, which are posted on our website, joining our email newsletter. We send an email newsletter once a month at the beginning of the first Wednesday of the month. We don't share your information with anyone, and you can always unsubscribe if you want to, though I hope you won't. And then RSVP to future webinars. We have started having these webinars since the pandemic started to be able to connect with people, at least virtually. And we plan to continue those once a month. It's usually the second Wednesday of the month, unless there's some big change in immigration law that we want to push out sooner than that. So I hope that you'll connect with us again. We have about 5 minutes left. If you have questions that we have not addressed, feel free to put those here in the chat box and we're happy to address them. In the meantime, or try to address them. In the meantime, I'm going to take a look at some of the questions that were submitted. As I said, some of them were very detailed and we're not able to give legal advice over a webinar. But let me just take a look at some of them. And some of them, I wasn't quite sure what the person was asking. But H1B extension and premium processing and H4 EAD processing is something that one person asked about. That's something that's very confusing. Premium processing is available for H1B petitions. It is not available for H4 dependents or for their EADs, employment authorization documents. So a lot of people will file their, or want to file their H1B petition and premium processing, which is fine, but just know that if you do that, it's not necessarily going to impact the H4 or the H4 EAD. It might to a certain extent because the H1B has to be approved before the H4 and the H4 EAD is, but it does not otherwise apply to the H4 and EAD. USCIS used to process the H4s in premium processing just as a courtesy if the H1B was filed in premium. That's no longer the case because of the fingerprinting requirement. If you apply before the October 2nd deadline, I'll be able to pay previous filing fees for the N400, yes. So anything that you file before October 2nd, it has to be received before October 2nd. You will use the current filing fees. So if you're interested in filing, whether it's the N400 or an application for a green card, it's a great idea to go ahead and get started on that. It can take time to get the documentation together and get everything filed. We're at the beginning, almost the middle of August now. So this is a great time to go ahead and get that started. We have one, and the current filing, it's not necessarily lower, but the current filing fees will apply as long as you file before October 2nd. We had one question come in. If an H1B amendment is pending with USCIS in the normal mode, meaning not premium, if we file a new H1B amendment, an extension and premium, which one will be active? That's a great question. So this person is, and this is probably the last question that we'll take because we have about 2 minutes left, but if you have others, submit them just in case. So in this particular situation, the person has filed an H1B amendment. They want to file a second amendment and extension and premium. My experience is if the first amendment that was filed is not an extension, then they will likely approve the H1B amendment and extension that's filed in premium first, and that will be the one that is effective. That's with the same client. It's a pretty detailed question, so definitely contact us to get more details before you file something like that. But in general, if the first petition is just an amendment, then they'll go ahead and process the premium one. I say if it's just an amendment because if it was an extension and the I-94 has already expired, if the first petition was an extension, then they'll want to have that one approved. USCIS will have to have that one approved before they approve the second one. We have 1 minute left. Let me see if I can find another question that I think would be helpful for everyone. One thing I wanted to mention is that one person asked, is there a possibility of spillover of employment-based categories to either family-based or employment-based rest of the world to EB2 India? So I think they're saying, are they going to take unused green cards from other categories, either family-based or employment-based, and apply those to EB2 India? Yes, that is a possibility. The way that they allocate green cards is very complicated. So I'm not going to go into the specifics of that, but just know that as the end of the year, so the fiscal year for USCIS and Department of State starts October 1st. In October, there are generally more green cards available per the visa bulletin than there are towards the end of the fiscal year. So right now we're at the end of the fiscal year in August and September, so there are fewer green cards available. If there are unused green cards in other categories, those could trickle down to other categories that may include India, EB2, EB3. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that there has been a bill that you may have been tracking or heard of called the High Skilled Immigration Act. It's in the Senate. It's S386. Just last week, it looks like that bill would pass the Senate. It was a bill that would essentially get rid of the per country limitations for the visa bulletin. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, this is pretty in-depth and complicated, but if you're following it, you probably know what I'm talking about. But that bill was opposed last week by Senator Rick Scott in Florida, who had some interest for his constituents. So that is not going anywhere right now. So with that, we will wrap up. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you will join us again for a future webinar. Follow us on social media, subscribe to our newsletter. We want to get information out to you and to help you. These are challenging times, immigration-wise and otherwise. So we want to do as much as we can to help you and let you know what's going on. Hope you all have a great afternoon. Thanks for joining us.